So Vespiquen, ever since being released in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl way back in 2007, has consistently been known as one of the worst Pokemon that we have ever been given in the franchise's history. It's always been in a very awkward spot because it's meant to be a defensive Pokemon, but it's got the bug flying typing. And it was introduced in the same generation as Stealth Rock, meaning we're adding a defensive Pokemon for the first time ever that also conveniently takes half of its health every time it wants to switch in because of another mechanic that we've added. Add on that Vespiquen's move pool has never been something very inspiring, and its stats just have never been able to really help it keep up against top tier threats throughout the generations, and you've got a recipe for failure. Vespiquen has consistently been untiered every generation of Pokemon that it has been available to us in, and it's never really had much of a reason at all to be used, up until this generation of NU. As you can see on the current Scarlet and Violet viability rankings, Vespiquen finds itself in the mid ranking. And I don't mean mid as in, wow, this mon's mid. I mean middle as in, oh, it's actually pretty okay. Now why is that? Well, for starters, we gotta look at its move pool additions. Vespiquen this generation actually got access to spikes. And as everyone knows, in Generation 9, there are very few hazard removers available in lower tiers. Currently, we're working with basically Pokemon like Quaxwell, or Ikoria, which usually wants to run a Quiver Dance set instead, Frostmoth, which usually wants to run a Quiver Dance set instead, Braviary, which just has a lot of other options at its disposal, or, say, Lurantis or Drifblim, which are frankly not the best Pokemon. And so getting to be another source of spikes in a generation where a ton of Pokemon got access to the move is huge, because it already affords you a very distinct niche as a defensive Pokemon. You can also set up injury hazards. Now, the next reason, of course, falls back to Generation 8. And in Generation 8, we got the item Heavy Duty Boots. Now, if you recall what I said at the start of this video, Vespiquen's always been kinda bad, especially at the time of its introduction, because it's meant to fulfill a defensive role, but it takes half its health from Stealth Rock, and Stealth Rock are on every good Pokemon team. Well, that isn't the case anymore. Vespiquen doesn't have to worry about that. And that's huge because it gives it so much more longevity, especially when combined with its recovery in Roost. Now, the third reason Vespiquen is actually pretty solid right now is Toxic. Toxic has always been known throughout Pokemon's history as an incredible move, especially for pretty passive walls like, say, your Vespiquen or even a bulky Landorus. Toxic is really cool, especially in Generation 9, because very few Pokemon have access to the move. It's essentially limited to just poison types, and in a few outliers such as Vespiquen. So for a Pokemon that really doesn't have a whole lot of offensive firepower to claim fame to, having access to Toxic still, especially in combination with Spikes and U-Turn, is absolutely massive. It prevents Vespiquen from just being a sitting duck against all the top tier Pokemon like Oricorio and Goodra. You can get a poison off if they try to directly switch into you, and because you are rather bulky, you'll probably tank at least one hit, and you can U-turn out, or of course you could make the safe play and just directly switch out after crippling them with that Toxic. But what is the fourth reason that Vespiquen is so solid right now? Well, its defensive typing is finally actually really good, and this does harken back to our point about how Stealth Rock is no longer a huge deal with Heavy Duty Boots, especially when you take Terra type into account here. If you look at the top tier Pokemon for NU, you see Passimian, we see Metacham, we see Tauros Paldea, we see Toxicroak. We see a lot of fighting types, and having a Pokemon that can very, very easily switch into those strong fighting type attacks is fantastic. And thanks to Terra Stylization, as introduced in Gen 9, Vespiquen isn't even too worried about if Passimian knocks its Heavy Duty Boots off. You can Terra into a Ghost type, you're now also a Spin Blocker, which is a really cool niche. And now you even gain a resistance to some of these Pokemon's other attacks, like Toxicroak's Gunk Shot, which is very useful. Now I do want to show off a sequence from this game here. I believe this is between Zebin and Boof, I believe. And I want to pause, I want to resume it from turn 12 here, because we're going to actually see what Vespiquen can sort of do within a match. So, we're going to see the opponent switch into their Leafeon here. The Sandaconda will go for rest, and then they're going to make a double switch into the Toxicroak, predicting this Copperajah. Now, Toxicroak's a huge threat in Inyu, of course, and although Boof does have the Sandaconda, he doesn't want to directly switch into it because it's still asleep. He could get very unlucky with Shed Skid Turds, and this Toxicroak is going to be Swords Dance on a hyper offense team like this. But fortunately, he does have Vespiquen, and what Vespiquen's able to do for him is he's able to switch into predicted fighting move and scare him out with the potential of an Air Slash, but also just get that safe switch with his U-turn. Now generates momentum on that Veluza. He's able to get his Passimian in to revenge kill it. And he's able to go right back to his Vespiquen because he can threaten a Toxic on whatever comes in. In this case, it's the Spiritomb. Even though it tears into a Ghost type to get rid of its U-turn neutrality, he still ends up getting crippled, and now the Spiritomb is less useful for the rest of the game. And as the Vespiquen goes down, he's able to get that little spike up just to add some pressure to the Toxicroak. And I think Vespiquen is just a really cool Pokemon to look at this gen, because it really was one of the biggest winners of the generational shift. You've got a few others as well, of course, like Whiscash even gaining access to hazards, Gastrodon gaining access to hazards. But I think when you look at Vespiquen especially, as a Pokemon that has always lacked a niche in any sort of tier, because we could even view Whiscash in ADVNU as a time where it was pretty darn good. Vespiquen's not like that. It has always been terrible. But as it turns out, all it needed, a couple move pool additions, a couple other mechanical changes that enable its niche to actually work, and now you've got a pretty darn viable wall that you can use on your balance teams. I hope you all enjoyed this short little informational video. Of course, if you did, leave a like, subscribe if you aren't already subscribed, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.